Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget, millennial entitlement and many others.
Right on, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to RightOnGame.com.
That's RightOnGame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. RightOnGame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seattle. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seattle.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 435-9er-21. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4739er, 89er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds AGPT. Gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to discuss H.R. 1. That was a bill that passed the House last week, and I just don't think enough has been discussed on this topic. So what do? I reach out to Hans von Spokovsky to talk about it, and he's been gracious enough to accept the invitation. So with that, welcome, Hans.
Thanks for having me.
It was, 4 or 5 Congresses ago that any piece of legislation that went through the House had to have some kind of a constitutional, statement on how it was deemed to be a constitutional piece of law. Right. This H.R. 1 isn't anything. I mean, it isn't even close to being constitutional on its face, and I'm not even a lawyer. Hans, help.
Well, no, you're right. We should explain. H.R. 1 is a 600-plus pages bill sponsored by Nancy Pelosi and many other Democrats, and it is it's basically a federalization and micromanagement of the election administration process, which have been run by the states and local governments for our entire history. But this is basically a takeover by the federal government, not just in the election administration process, but also imposing all kinds of new restrictions in the campaign area that would basically violate the First Amendment rights of Americans to engage in political speech and political activity. And there's so many things in here that are just basically unconstitutional. I mean, it's hard to list them all. I mean, I can just give you one quick example. The Constitution, the 14th Amendment, gives states directly the right to remove the ability of felons to vote. And it's up to the states to decide if they want to do that. 48 states do say you can't vote while you're in prison. 2 states allow you to vote in prison, Maine and Vermont. And then it's up to the states to decide when you get that right to vote back. Well, this H.R. 1 bill says that every state must restore the right to vote the moment a felon steps out of the prison door, even if they still have parole or probation to go through, even if they haven't paid, any court-ordered restitution, and no matter what crime they were charged with. So, not only is that not a good idea, I think it's bad policy, but you can't use a federal statute to override a constitutional right, and yet that's what this bill tries to do.
What about the 10th Amendment? I mean, states have, what is it? Separate but equal. I mean, so I can't even believe that we haven't had a governor go, what in the world are you thinking with H.R. 1?
Well, I will tell you that while I don't think any governors did it, the secretaries of state, which, as you know, are the chief election officials of states, about a dozen of them, they wrote, actually more than a dozen, wrote letters to Nancy Pelosi and to Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader in the House, protesting this bill and basically saying that it violates the rights of the states to make these decisions. It interferes with their ability to administer election, to check the eligibility of their voters, and it imposes huge unfunded mandates on the states too.
And they can change, voting districts. But there was one in here that it bans the political appointees, like the Attorney General, from, I would say, handling any kind of matters that deal with policies and programs and executive orders and enforcement of the law. What's that got to do?
It has nothing to do with elections, but it's just one of the odd provisions thrown in here. What it says is that no political appointee of a president can be involved in any matter in which the president is named. And I'll give you a quick example of that. Remember when President Trump signed his executive order, what everybody calls the travel ban, which suspended the entry of aliens from certain terrorist safe havens around the world. Remember, a whole series of lawsuits were filed directly naming Donald Trump over that travel ban. Those cases went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Trump administration won. The U.S. Supreme Court said this was well within the power of the president. Well, Donald Trump was personally named in those lawsuits. If this provision had been in effect, none of his political appointees, including his attorney general, could have defended these cases in court. They could not have. The Justice Department, his Solicitor General, the Solicitor General of the Justice Department is the person who normally argues cases in the Supreme Court. Well, he's a political appointee, so he could not have appeared at the U.S. Supreme Court to defend against this lawsuit filed against Donald Trump over the travel ban, which the government won. I mean, that's an absurd provision, but it's also obviously highly unconstitutional because it interferes with the president's ability as the commander-in-chief and as the chief executive to carry out his duty to enforce the law.
Hans. The other one that was fascinating is that the federal government would take over the voter rolls and the voter registration system, right?
Yeah, in essence, they've got all these provisions in there that make it virtually impossible for states to clean up their voter rolls. It forces states to put in things like same-day registration. So if someone walks into a polling place on election day and says, I want to register, the states would have to allow them to register and immediately vote, which, as I'm sure you realize, doesn't give election officials any time to actually check and verify any of the information the person's given on the voter registration form. The other thing it says is every state has to, you would no longer have a choice of whether you want to register to vote. You know, right now, if you go in and you get your driver's license in any state, they ask you, would you like to register to vote? And if you do, and that's a good system, you know, if you do, you fill out a form and you get registered. This would switch to a system where they're not going to ask you whether you want to register to vote. You will be automatically registered if you do anything with the Driver's License Bureau, or if you go into other state agencies like welfare offices, you will be automatically registered to vote without them asking you to do it, which obviously is going to cause, for example, lots of duplicate registrations. You know, if you go in, you apply for some kind of welfare benefit or maybe unemployment insurance at the same time that you also go in and you have to renew your driver's license, you may get registered not just once, you may get registered multiple times.
So if Osama bin Laden was still with us, he could just walk right into a voting poll and vote.
Yes.
Just for context. All right. Now I'm going to be snarky. I have a habit of doing that from time to time.
I've been accused of that too, you know.
I would say that every single person in the House, every Democrat, I don't think there's a single Republican that voted for H.R. 1. Every single Democrat or every single member of the House that voted for this ought to be really called out. Some of them are lawyers, I might add, for being in violation of the Constitution.
Oh, I agree, but you know, look, remember Nancy Pelosi, her last go-round when she was the Speaker before her current time, remember she was asked at one point about Obamacare and whether it was constitutional, and she was like, the Constitution? Nancy Pelosi and others like that, they pay no attention to the Constitution. They believe they have the power to do absolutely anything they want, and they don't care about the limits, for example, on the power of Congress that are set out in the Constitution.
So, we can almost, out of thin air, they can just create people. And they really necessarily are, by what Nancy Pelosi said the other day, that these people that come into the United States and want to assimilate, that wasn't her word, that's mine, because I don't know what word she used. We want them to be, have the full value and benefit of our systems, and we want them to be able to vote.
Right, which is yeah.
It's an admission of, yeah, she literally admitted, we don't care who you are, you get to vote.
Yeah, and that is the view. That's why, for example, the left has gone to court to stop states in lawsuits from, for example, verifying the citizenship of people who are registered to vote, because they don't want that happening. Or, look, I'll give you another quick example of this. Remember Terry McAuliffe, right? Former head of the DNC, former governor of Virginia,
yeah.
And a big friend of the Clintons. Look, a couple of years ago, the Republican-controlled legislature in Virginia passed a really smart law. It was a law that said that if you get called for jury duty and you're excused because you're not a U.S. citizen, the court has to notify local county election officials so that you can be taken off the voter registration list, because that's where they get the jury list from, right?
Yes.
Okay. Terry McAuliffe, as governor of Virginia, vetoed that bill. Now, there is not a single rational public policy ground for vetoing a bill like that unless it's because you want non-citizens to be able to register to vote, and to get away with it and not get caught.
Well, I've been saying the same thing about California. You know, that you have got non-citizens that are jurors. How does that work? And it happens because, you know, some of those names for the jury pool come out of voter registration. So
no, that's right.
Help,
So
Hans.
I mean, look, it's a real problem. California has large numbers of non-citizens on the rolls out there. There's plenty of evidence of that, and they're not election officials there. They have no interest whatsoever in doing anything about that. They don't want to find those individuals. They don't want to take them off the rolls because they believe it helps them retain political power. You know, California, by the way, is one of the states like New York. You know, two of our largest states that have no ID requirement, so anybody can walk into a polling place, ask for a ballot, and vote.
What I mean, we're not even sure what all the consequences are of HR1, but McConnell's not taking it up in the Senate, correct?
That is correct. He has said that it's dead on arrival in the Senate, which is we should all be thankful for.
So, what kind of repercussions can the conservatives and the Republicans use? I mean, do they have any arrows in their quiver to attach shame to these Democrats and to Nancy Pelosi for HR1?
Well, I tell you the way that yes. The answer to that is yes.
Okay, good answer.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example of how this could be done. Find some of the worst felons for example, in your particular state. People who have gone to prison for just heinous acts, but who have served their time and have come out and ask legislators who voted in favor of HR1. Give them the names of those felons and the terrible things they've done, and say you believe this person should be able to vote the moment they come back out of prison. No waiting period, no showing that they've turned over a new leaf. You ask them about that, and they will be embarrassed.
Voting is the most sacrosanct thing that we have.
It is.
And this is the biggest violation. I mean, I'm really I'm almost putting this in the same category as live birth abortions. Is that, am I being too dramatic, Hans?
Well, look, the live birth abortions really, that's infanticide and affects human lives. So I wouldn't quite compare to that. But what I would say,
from a scandal standpoint, I should say.
But what I would say is that look, we've been a functioning republic for a long time. We have a terrific system, and this bill is intended to basically destroy that democratic system. It's an anti-democratic system. It's the federal government trying to take over the running of elections, which is a bad idea. And the bill just overall is something that could very much damage the democratic process that we have in this country.
Who authored this? I mean, is this just a kind of a collection of stuff that were coming out of the DNC or the DCCC or whatever, that they decide to throw all this stuff into HR1? And was this truly a Nancy Pelosi creation, or does she share the blame?
She shares the blame, but this bill, look, there's about a dozen and a half liberal advocacy organizations that work on voting and election issues, and this bill, I think, was put together by all of those organizations and then given to Nancy Pelosi to sponsor, because it's every fantasy of the far left that they could possibly want in the election area.
Am I right in saying that even the ACLU came out against HR1?
They did, which tells you quite something. Yes, there are, as I was saying, there were provisions in here that change federal campaign finance laws and put in all kinds of restrictions on political speech and political activity. And the ACLU came out protesting those provisions, saying that they were a violation of the First Amendment rights of members of the public.
Is anybody having? Is this conversation dead in the halls of Congress? I mean, do they just kind of like left this thing off now that it's gone and it's not going anywhere?
I hope that's true, but what I suspect will happen is, look, this bill is like reading the 20-year long-term strategic plan of the left.
Yes.
To change election rules in the country to give them an advantage. So what I suspect is that we'll see various attempts, both this year and in following years, to take bits and pieces of this bill and attach them to must-pass legislation, like the continuing resolutions and other things to appropriate the government, and they'll try to stick bits and pieces of this in to get them passed, and that's what I think we need to be on the lookout for.
So they'll dissect piece parts of this and then stuff it into a late amendment that nobody's paying attention to. So
that's exactly right.
You got to have little, legislative police running around watching for the side pocket going into a file folder.
Right. That's exactly what we have to be on the lookout for.
How much?
That's eternal vigilance in Washington is a necessary component of defending our rights.
How much money do you think was attached to this bill coming in from outside progressive organizations? Is there a guess?
I mean, I think almost all of this came from outside progressive organizations.
Okay. So, here's a check and make sure that you vote yes.
Right.
What a terrifying platform. And it really does give the spirit of where this house is. And, I think it's massive clues on where they're necessarily going to go. And, what is it? For the People Act?
Yeah, For the People Act.
And
people have been kidding that it ought to be For the Democratic Incumbents Act.
Hans, did all of you over there at Heritage just want to, jump off a windowsill?
Well, I have to admit I was pretty upset when I saw this bill, and unfortunately I was forced to read all 600 pages of it. And I was just shaking my head on every page at how bad the provisions were and how obviously unconstitutional so many of them were.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Hans von Spokovsky. Thank you, Mr. Hans, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience and for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons, too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard to find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
Ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. From time to time, we like to talk about bad things that happen to good people, and certainly cases that involve the little guy, cases that don't get discussed very often. So Dr. Michael Pakaluk has been kind enough to join us on the Denise Simon Experience. The good doctor is quite busy. Working for, I think it's called the Catholic Thing. Is that right, Doctor?
I do write. I write for a daily kind of news journal of opinion called the Catholic Thing. Yeah.
And then you've got the Faith and Reason Institute?
That is the founder of the Catholic Thing has founded that as well.
Okay.
I'm a professor at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C.
And
currently
you.
I'm the acting dean. And I write a lot. I publish a lot of papers and books, which are scholarly, and also have a great wife and big brood of children. So really happy about that.
Well, all right. Well, then you're probably you're probably one of the more busy people that we've spoken to on the Denise Simon Experience. Lots of issues to write about, but we're going to talk about a poor 84-year-old widow in California. I want you to explain this case because it's got me shaking my head. Now, this widow was married to a veteran, and I guess in some cases she's a veteran herself, correct?
I think so, yeah.
And
he's passed away, yeah.
Yeah, so she's in a veteran's home. She's been there, several years, correct?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, she's been there quite a while.
And as part of, one of the things that this veterans home does is hold Bible classes, but there are some people that are old enough or too old or perhaps not in the best of health that they can necessarily attend those. So our widow has stepped up and has been holding her own Bible classes, and now we've determined that's a big no-no, correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty outrageous, right?
Yes. I mean, for an 84-year-old widow to have a lawyer.
Well, the one thing we can say that's good about it, she's not getting shaken down at the airport trying to get onto an airplane.
True enough. How did this case come to your attention?
Oh, it was a news item. You know, it was something that one of those outrageous things that you look at and you wonder, can this really be true? I was actually the subject of one of these things just a couple of weeks ago. I was invited to go down to Duke University to give a lecture on, is it only the beatific vision of God which can make us happy? So that's kind of a longstanding Christian view that, you know, money, wealth, fame, pleasure, none of those things will make us happy, but seeing a vision of God will make us happy. Mm-hmm. And it was going to be sponsored by the Catholic Student Center. They put in a proposal to the Student Senate to fund it, because they've got down at Duke, they've got zillions of dollars to give to every student group under the sun. But this had to be withdrawn because somebody from the LGBTQ plus group objected that it would be a triggering event to have somebody speak on such a topic down at Duke. And I kid you not, this was also in the newspapers. And you see these headlines, which are completely outrageous, and you know, they're very strange. This one is similar. Now, the background of this nursing home in California, this is the place, I think, where the shooting took place.
I think so too. It's a very big place and has been there a very long time.
Yeah. So what happens when something like that takes place is that basically there's extreme amount of oversight and rules and compliance, and everybody's bending over backwards to try to avoid being held responsible for, God forbid, another bad event here. So I suspect that's the atmosphere of the place, that probably some things weren't run all that well, and now they've gone kind of overboard in the direction of rules and regulations and compliance. And people who were kind of informally allowed to do their thing can't if they don't pass muster with this new regime. I think that's probably what's going on here. But there are a couple of things that are really interesting from a cultural point of view, and I don't think a good cultural point of view. I think a bad cultural point of view. One is that people believe that you should not have religion forced on you in any way. So if you're not free, so to speak, to get up out of your bed and get over to a living room where somebody's leading a Bible study, then we really can't be sure that you're giving your consent to this, and maybe it's being forced on you. So people are very, in our world with autonomy and self-assertion, and don't tread on my space and don't force your religious beliefs on mine. On me, I think that can be something that's in the background here. And then I think another is this, it does take its toll. We see movies where, we know Hollywood, for example, whenever it portrays a Christian in the movies, it's always some kind of wacky person who's fanatical and crazy. There's this, just something, I mean, there are many, many cases. Michael Medved wrote a book about this, but, for example, a fairly old film now, Stephen King's Misery, is about a woman who takes this guy who's in a car crash and basically just tortures him for years, right? Mm-hmm. And she's featured with a cross around her neck, like, oh, she's a Christian, she must be into torturing people for fun. And I kind of tend to slop that off because it's so absurd that I don't really pay attention to it. But people hear these lies for years after year after year. If for example, for anti-Semitism, we'd all be very, very sensitive and angry that Jews are being portrayed in this way. But Christians kind of, it's kind of open season. You can portray them as crazies and fanatics, and some people then actually end up believing that.
Well, it's really kind of open when you have Senate hearings too, including with Senator Feinstein and Senator Kamala Harris. But
right, exactly. There was that fantastic jurist from Notre Dame, Amy Barrett, I think is her name, who was in second in line after Kavanaugh. Maybe she should have been put forward as a nominee for the Supreme Court. Just because she believed in God, she was ridiculed, and it was suggested she's not qualified to serve on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, didn't they ask her to drop her associations? I mean, look.
Yeah, there's another judge who was part of the Knights of Columbus. So that made him, that made him incapable of exercising impartial judgment.
Well, in the case of our widow, is her name Braun?
Yeah,
I'm
think
not
it's
sure I know how to
Brew.
pronounce her
I think
name.
it's a French name. I think it's just
Brew.
Brew,
Okay.
Breue. Yeah.
She's holding a Bible study class, which has got to be volunteer. I mean, people have to make, she's not like she's going over to somebody else's retirement veterans condo room and putting them in wheelchairs and whatnot and wheeling them over to, some kind of hall where she's holding this. I mean, it's all a volunteer kind of situation. But yet some kind of rules or some kind of something has obviously changed here in the last, well, I said just recently, I don't know what the time span is, and they've threatened to expel her.
There's been very little follow-up reporting on this, and I think there's probably been a kind of a clampdown and silencing over what's happened, but because it just affects the reputation of this place so badly. But apparently, in the snippets that have come out, in her Bible study, the topic of hell came up and the possibility that somebody might be damned to hell. And I guess that was taken to be so frightening and so terrible that she was at risk of unsettling and unstabilizing people she was speaking to about this. So you could see how, again, with the shooting there, anything that looks like it's, involves a kind of crisis is they'd be very concerned about. But this is, people who are approaching death on their deathbeds or in nursing homes do need to be thinking about the eternal fate of their souls. That you're doing them a favor if you bring that to their attention.
I can't deny that one. I mean, I'm not on the deathbed yet, and I think of it all the time. Look, it's remarkable to me, Dr. Pakaluk, that not enough denominations are speaking out about the war on religion or the war on Christianity. We just had this big brouhaha about this House resolution that began with anti-Semitism, and then it kind of got, I guess, broadened to the fact that it almost is. I don't even know what a resolution means. I mean, you have a resolution, but there's no consequence for the continued anti-Semitism that goes on and anti-whatever else.
It's called virtue signaling. That's what it's called.
Where are the rest of the denominations here? I mean, where's the Episcopal Church on stomping their feet, or the Methodists or the Lutherans? I mean, we know that the Jews, I mean, they have an operation here that is saying, stop persecuting us. I mean, how, is this our destiny forever and ever and ever? But where's everybody else? Especially when, an 84-year-old widow is being threatened to be, evicted to where I don't even know, because, she's holding a volunteer Bible study class. I would think there'd be outrage all over the place. Help me with this.
There's a kind of word magic or concept magic that people can work that make things appear to be upside down of where they actually are. So, for example, the word conservative. Right? Conservative is meant to be someone who's clinging on to the way we're doing things. But actually, the conservative is generally revolutionary, say, wanting to do something entirely different way from the way it's commonly done. And I think that, Christian is the same thing, that really in our society, probably, most people call themselves Christians, aren't really practicing Christianity particularly well, but it somehow by this word magic, it's identified with the establishment. And so someone who's a Christian is part of a kind of oppressing class in this way of looking at things. It doesn't matter that she's an 84-year-old widow who's very frail and whose husband and she, but especially her husband, served the country and therefore is owed respect and honor really more than we can ever repay for somebody who served the country. That doesn't matter. She's a Christian, and therefore by this word magic I was referring to, she's part of the oppressing class. So she doesn't get any sympathy. She doesn't get our attention either.
For a very long time, there has been an attack on all things First Amendment. And yet all of us out here just kind of rolled with it. But now it seems to be getting a little bit of traction when it comes to the practice of free expression and the practice of religion. But it's almost as though there is, I don't know how to necessarily put it. It's being packaged that it's not vogue, it's not stylish, and you have to be some kind of weirdo or some kind of geek, religious geek, to be, adherence to your faith. There's got to be some countermeasures here, Doctor, correct?
You're right about that. It used to be that freedom of expression would always carry the day in an argument, right? So somebody might be weak on religious practice or free exercise of religion. But when it came to free expression, right, that would be a winning argument always in the American context. And that's no longer the case. So we know there's tremendous political correctness on campus. People want to shut down those who disagree with them. They look for one point of disagreement, and if somebody disagrees with them on one issue they're very passionate about, they don't even want this person to speak on campus. Mm-hmm. Or there are rules for reporting people that are in play at a lot of campuses, or desensitization, required desensitization programs. So it's when even free expression is under attack, then we know that always or historically the less prominent liberty of free exercise of religion is definitely not not in its heyday right now.
I'm of the notion that the denominations, the Christians, the Catholics, and so probably ought to have some kind of a confab, and maybe create a fund to go on a huge PR campaign and just say, we're sick of this and we're going to stay with this in some kind of a pro First Amendment, a religious protection mission until it's necessarily understood. I know Israel has worked on this kind of thing, and I believe that there is some kind of good strategy in that. Am I just way out of base on that kind of thinking?
Well, there used to be something that was pretty effective called the Catholic League, and that was maybe it's called the Catholic Defense League. I don't even know its name because it hasn't been very prominent. But it's modeled on the Jewish Defense League, and there'd be a fairly prominent spokesperson who, when Catholic Church appeared to be persecuted, would be quoted and would have lawyers available and so on to fight it. I think your idea is a really fascinating one for Christians in general, to kind of band together and have that kind of defender or spokesperson. But as you were posing your question, I was thinking, well, aren't we what we're kind of lamenting here? Isn't this mainly an issue of the coasts? I mean, if you travel through flyover country, so-called, you find that Christianity and the practice of Christianity is respected, that it's admired, that it's looked at for being a good thing, that a lot of people are practicing their faith and free about it. In a sense, there are two countries when it comes to the free exercise of religion, and it's more the coasts that are becoming very, very intolerant. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. I just know that it's certainly not a vogue thing anymore. And it's almost as though those that adhere to their faith, those that go to church on Sundays, those that participate in activities on Wednesday nights or Fridays or Saturdays, whatever it may be, are wearing somewhat of a scarlet letter on the non-believers or the non-adherents. And I find it absolutely remarkable. And yet there's so many fascinating stories that I think are out there because of people's power of prayer and loyalty to their faith, that great things have happened, and those stories are not being shared enough.
Well, So part of it, I think, is bad education. So how many students have to read through any large portion of the Bible when they go through school? They're grossly ignorant of it. And so if somebody says, well, Christianity is a bunch of fairy stories and crazy wacky tales, that's what they think. They really haven't they studied the life of Christ very carefully, or they haven't read the history of the Jewish people. And just take, for example, the story of Joseph and his brothers and how amazing that is. And one of the great I think true, one of the great touching, beautiful stories in all of history. The teachings of Christ and the life of Christ. This is the stuff of our civilization. And so if you don't have that background, you don't have this kind of basic respect which you get from just knowing about Christianity, the art, the great buildings,
the history. I mean, it's the basis of all history. Fighting
off the Muslims, for example.
Yeah, the cradle of civilization.
The attackers for all those centuries. You have to ask them, that doesn't mean anything to you? You think it would be all the same if Europe had been overrun by attacking Islamic armies? There's a lack of sense, and that comes from a good education. I don't know how that can be reversed. It's so massive. It's like a huge tidal wave. You can't by pushing back in one area, like my family or my neighborhood, you can't affect that. It's a vast failure of education and passing on culture. And then it gets reinforced by our technology. So the smartphone makes people dumb. Actually, the phone may be smart, but the person who's using it is fairly dumb.
Don't disagree there.
Very distracted people who are living in the moment, fascinated by things that are really passing, that are ephemeral. And if that's 10 years from now what we're dealing with most people in the country, wow, that's a huge social disaster. It's kind of like people say the Roman Empire fell because they were using lead in their pipes, and they didn't understand that it was becoming more and more enfeebled over time because they're ingesting all of this lead. I think we're going to, find out. We won't even notice it because we've become progressively dumber. Yeah, there'd be some smart engineers who are still, building drones and so on, but, most of us are going to be kind of putty for dictators, I think.
Well, when it comes to our 84-year-old widow, Mrs. Brow, and I think she is one of probably thousands of cases that are out there that are indicative of the anti whatever label we want to put on it. And as a consequence, I would think, hitting a sermon on a Sunday or, a Thursday night, whatever, or Wednesday night, whatever it may be, I would say some of these stories necessarily need to be told to the parishioners. So, when you leave the service, you have an opportunity to go home or go to, some other friends and family and neighbors and share what is really happening here. Maybe it's the content of the sermons that need to somewhat be altered. Your thoughts?
I think people need to be woken up. I think you're exactly right about that. And we like to turn away. It's easier to put, that can't possibly be true. It actually is true. So you have to wake up and pay attention, and maybe become a little bit more involved, a little bit more outspoken as a start.
Well, we have, the public school systems that have expelled all of that syllabus, if you will, because we had this thing that was coined years ago, and wrongly so, separation of church and state, which is, I guess, kind of what is happening out here in this veterans home in California, because it's a veterans thing. I don't know if it's the VA that is somewhat fighting back, which is obviously part of government. But I think maybe there's a time for a debate now on how the whole nomenclature of separation of church and state is really a false headline, a false title. Your thoughts?
That's so true. If the state is expanding as much as our state is expanding, maybe back when the state had very minimal functions, you could say, well, let's keep the state completely secular because the rest of society was really deeply imbued with religion. But where it occupies so much of our society, and there's so many organizations and associations that are receiving federal aid in one form or another, and if the fact that you do means that you have to observe an absurd extreme doctrine of separation, then we're really in trouble. Then religion really gets pushed back so that it becomes a simply private matter. You can't live it in your neighborhood. You can't live it in your work. You can't live it in the public square. There's a really excellent book that your listeners may be interested in by a great religious thinker, Richard John Newhouse, who wrote a book called The Naked Public Square, precisely about this phenomenon. And if you go back to the founders, you will see another book that's really great about the founders is by Michael Novak, Novak, and it's called On Two Wings. Those are the two wings of faith and reason. And how the founders understood church and state, that they complement each other, that they're not at war and each should be assisting the other. The state needs the assistance of religion, and religion does need some help from the state.
I don't know that I could put it any better. We appreciate those two recommendations for sure.
Well, can I recommend what third book? Since we've been discussing we've been discussing Bible study. I just finished a book on the Gospel of Mark, actually, and it's called The Memoirs of St. Peter, published by Regnery Press, and it's a new translation where my view. I've been reading Greek for 30 years now. My view is that the Greek of Mark captures the sounds of a spoken language, and I like the view of the early Christians that Mark was Peter's interpreter and was kind of taking down Peter's sermons. So that's why I call it the Memoirs of St. Peter. That's actually a title that's stolen from the early Christians. That's how they refer to the Gospel of Mark. So it's just a great book for getting the sense of the real immediacy of the gospel. That it's something fresh and new, the way it struck people at 2,000 years ago.
Well, Dr. Michael Pakaluk, thanks for your time and sharing some of this background here on our poor widow. We appreciate your good work and your time here on the Denise Simon Experience. And ladies and gentlemen, we've got more coming your way, so stay with us.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic Radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.
Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget millennial entitlement and many others.
Right On, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to rightongame.com.
That's rightongame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
Rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. Rightongame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEVT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Pacific Legal Foundation. I mean, the law firm that's just doing remarkable work for the little guy and the little guys. So Wen Fa has agreed to be with us because we're going to talk about a union case in Minnesota. I thought we've solved these union things, Wen, but obviously we haven't. But welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay. I guess one of the first questions I need to ask here is we've got some kind of an agreement that the, I don't know, was it the school system, Minnesota Minneapolis public school system did, or is this a state thing where they have some kind of a, what is it, a PLA, kind of a doctrine that says if you're not union, you don't get in on any kind of bid process?
Yeah, so it's the agreement we're challenging is related to work that's done in the Minneapolis Public School District, but these sorts of PLAs are pretty prevalent in Minnesota as well as California and some other states. Basically, what this agreement that we're challenging says is that if you want to do work in the Minneapolis Public School District, you have to agree to these union negotiated terms, such as paying into union fringe fund benefits and getting your workers from the union. And, you know, a lot of contractors just cannot agree to those terms because doing so would completely upend their way of business. And our argument is just that, you know, in America, opportunity should be available to all. They shouldn't just be available to the politically connected or the politically powerful. And, you know, government favoritism is unconstitutional.
Is it overstating it if I say this is almost like union extortion?
Well, it's certainly, you know, I would like to not focus as much on the union part of it, but focus more on the government part of it, because the government has the obligation to treat people fairly, to not discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. I mean, can you imagine a school district that said only Democrats are allowed to work on our projects here? That would be a blatant violation of the First Amendment. Similarly, when the government says basically only de facto union contractors can work in projects in the school district, that's also a violation of the First Amendment.
I see. Well, good point. But the school system, which is government, I guess the question is, when did this project labor agreement thing happen? Did this happen 10 years ago or 5 years ago that really kind of shut out the non-union type bid access?
Well, it's the Master Project Labor Agreement, in which all of this was negotiated, was adopted in 2004. But actually, the problem is that there are about 24 ongoing projects in Minneapolis School District and counting that have incorporated verbatim the terms of that project labor agreement, terms that say that you have to hire workers from union hiring halls, often at the expense of your own workers, in order just to work on one of these projects.
So Pacific Legal's position is to challenge the school system and this project labor agreement?
Well, it's just a challenge. We're not challenging the school system as a whole. We're challenging the school district's decision to make opportunity available only to the politically connected. We're not saying that school districts shouldn't discriminate against unions. They shouldn't give unions a leg up. They should treat people equally regardless of their viewpoint.
And so you're representing a non-union electrical contractor, correct? Who's got obviously a very nice business that he has created in Minneapolis, correct?
Absolutely. He's one of the fastest growing. He's been featured in the last few years as one of the fastest growing businesses in Minnesota. He started with roughly 12 employees, and now he's over 100 employees.
Wow.
And he's very successful, family-owned business. They've been serving people in Minnesota for about 4 decades now. Very successful business. He works on similar projects all across the state and has done a fantastic job. And, the only reason he's not able to do that fantastic work for the children in the Minneapolis School District is because of this project labor agreement, which rigs the system in favor of those who do business a different way.
Is this almost too kind of a RICO thing that the school district? Obviously the public school district has taken some kind of guidance from some other power for just the Minneapolis school district to do this. Is the public school district the only entity that has this kind of agreement?
No. Some other government entities have the agreement too. It's been used, for example, to build stadiums in Minnesota, for example. So other government entities will adopt these agreements from time to time. But in fact, these agreements have been outlawed in about roughly half the states, I think partially because for policy concerns that they increase the cost to the taxpayers and they're anti-competitive, but also perhaps for constitutional concerns that they're plainly unconstitutional. These are not RICO concerns. These are constitutional concerns under the First Amendment, in that, the government can't say the Democrats will be more powerful in some states, the Republicans will be more powerful in other states, but the government can't simply say, because this party has a lot of influence, then we're only going to allow people of this political viewpoint to work on public projects.
When are you in the discovery phase, or are we past the discovery phase in this case?
No, we actually just launched our complaint, just launched this case on Tuesday morning. So we're all up at St. Paul, the electrical company, and, an association of contractors who are not unionized. It was a great event. We all stood together to vindicate the rights of everyone under the First Amendment. Frankly, union members as well as non-union members, because nobody should be treated differently. Imagine a law in a state in which the non-union members have more political power. Can the government just refuse to do business with union members? We think no in both circumstances. We think that the First Amendment requires the government not to discriminate on the basis of viewpoint.
My gut tells me, and since you're about to go into the discovery phase, there's some other things in play here. Not, and the word or the term kickback comes to mind. Are you expecting in the discovery phase to find out some other kind of fraud or some backroom winks and nods?
Well, I don't know if I would use the word fraud, but it's certainly the case that a lot of these, non-governmental entities have tremendous power, depending on which state it is. And I don't think it's any secret that the unions sometimes have tremendous power in Minnesota. So, that part of it is, I don't think that part of it is as objectionable as what the government does because the unions have this tremendous power. The government, in order to, for favoritism's sake, will just grant these projects basically to either union contractors or de facto union contractors, basically contractors that, while not technically unionized, are willing to agree to these union negotiated terms. And our clients will absolutely not agree with these terms because it would completely upend their way of business and the way they do work.
Has the project labor agreement been challenged anywhere else in Minnesota outside of the public school system?
Well, project labor agreements in general have been challenged elsewhere.
Okay.
But the challenge there has been kind of different, in a preemption challenge, saying that federal law prohibits different types of project labor agreements. So those challenges haven't been successful. But I think here we're not making a preemption claim. We're making a First Amendment claim and saying that these project labor agreements burden the right of our clients to freely associate, and also discriminates against our clients based on their viewpoint.
What is the Minnesota or Minneapolis school system really saying about this? That this is their, privilege, or it was a policy making thing within the Board of Education, so we're going to try and they're going to adhere to this, or
well, they haven't.
Go ahead.
Sorry, they haven't said anything yet.
Uh-huh.
But the way that these have been defended in other parts of the country, the government usually says, well, these project labor agreements promote stability, and labor peace and things of that sort. That's simply not true. We see all sorts of projects which have operated under these project labor agreements, but there have been strikes and things of that sort nonetheless. And merit shop contractors that aren't part of the unions, they have a track record too of completing projects on time and efficiently and in a productive manner. So basically, all we're saying with this lawsuit, we're not saying that every project should go to a non-union contractor.
Sure.
We're not saying that every project should go to a union contractor. We're saying that projects should go to the best qualified contractor, and I think that is an argument that appeals to common sense and would ultimately appeal to a court.
Just for context, this particular, I guess, dollars that are appropriated for the work to be done in the Minneapolis Public School District by an electrical contractor or any other contractor, but in this case, the electrical. What is this worth to an electrical contractor like Lakewood?
Well, different projects are of different sizes, but Minneapolis public schools, they frequently have projects that are worth, over $1 million. So these are very big projects that Lake Town is qualified for and that other contractors are qualified for. And we know they're qualified for those projects because they've successfully bid on those projects and have successfully completed those projects in other parts of the state in which these agreements are not enforced. And they've done a great job. So all they're asking for is to be able to get into a fair shake, to be able to get in the batter's box and take a swing. That's all they're asking for. And, I think the First Amendment gives them that opportunity.
Is there a distinction in First Amendment to competition? I mean, in this case, would the argument be one and the same, or would they be a two-track argument?
In competition?
Yeah, because I mean, what they're doing is virtually eliminating competition here if they being the school system.
Right. So I think, some sorts of anti-competitive laws do not implicate the First Amendment, but it does here because it is discrimination on the basis of viewpoint. The clients that we represent frequently advocate positions that are contrary to the positions that the unions advocate across the state of Minnesota in collective bargaining and other issues related to labor in Minnesota. So, a lot of courts have said that union, non-union viewpoints are different, just as Republican and Democratic viewpoints are different. And when the government discriminates and adopts an anti-competitive law, it just cannot do so on the basis of viewpoint. That's a First Amendment violation.
If Laketown Electric, for the sake of argument, decided that they would necessarily comply with this, project labor agreement, or what would it? I mean, would they have to cough up, some membership dollars or some kind of dues, or I mean, is there a lot of stipulations in this labor agreement?
Yeah, there are a lot of stipulations. Basically, they would have to get their workers from union hiring halls that have been recommended by the union over their own workers that they traditionally work with. That's one. Another thing is they have to pay into fringe benefit funds established and jointly administered by the union, even when they've established their own funds that provide duplicative benefits. And third, their employees would have to pay dues to the union for union purposes and all that sort of thing. Basically, these provisions would make them de facto union contractors, and that's something that they're not willing to do.
It's a fascinating argument here. I mean, Pacific Legal's got a wide range of, arguments under First Amendment. When it comes to forcing payment, forcing compliance, that because of those forced issues, it goes against, freedom to associate or not associate, correct?
Right. Well, I think Pacific Legal Foundation has had a long history of protecting the rights of dissenters, protecting the rights of those who might, not have the position that everybody else takes. So, for example, in the early 1990s, we represented an attorney who objected to paying bar dues, which were then used by the state bar, to advocate for positions for which that he was opposed to. So that's one case. And then, of course, last year, the big Janus case, PLF filed briefs in that case saying that, look, just because you're a public employee doesn't mean you have to fund all of these policies which may benefit the union but might not be something that you support. And I think this is similar. We're talking about the rights of people who aren't as politically powerful in Minnesota, but why should that matter about whether or not they can work on a job for which they're qualified? Jobs should be available to the most qualified, not to the most politically powerful. Everybody, that's a great thing about the Constitution, and it's a great thing about America that, everyone, regardless of how politically powerful or politically powerless you are, has the same constitutional rights.
Does this add some other kind of dimension to discrimination?
Well, as you know, PLF has a long history of fighting against discrimination. Just yesterday, we won a huge case in Hartford against racial discrimination in Hartford by a law that keeps Black and Hispanic students out of schools.
Oh, good! I remember that case. Good.
Yeah, with empty seats. So it was just one step in the litigation process, but we won an important first step yesterday. And similarly, when the government discriminates against people based on who they are in terms of viewpoint, that's also discrimination, and that's also prohibited, though it's prohibited under the First Amendment instead of the 14th Amendment.
For the sake of argument, PLF wins this on behalf of Lake Town Electric. So this sends a much lighter, I guess, wider message legally that on these type of agreements, correct? That other states and other government entities need to, I guess, rewrite a policy or legislation, correct?
Absolutely. That's what PLF does, is we try to set precedent nationwide, and the precedent we would set in this case would help everybody, Republicans, Democrats, union members, non-union members, because when the government discriminates against any group based on the fact that they're not as politically powerful as some other group, that's wrong, and that's unconstitutional under the First Amendment. So we're trying to establish precedent and vindicate the First Amendment rights of all Americans.
Listen, it's really, I would think a lot of union shops out there would be watching this case pretty carefully. You think that's a possibility?
I think so, and I think if they really thought about it, as I said, this case would, help them in some context too, because unions, although they are powerful in Minnesota, they're not as powerful in other states. So, I would hope that some unions actually join us in our fight against government favoritism and cronyism, because I think that's a message that everybody could really get behind.
Is any part of the Minneapolis public school system unionized themselves? The teachers unionized?
I think they are. I am not sure about that, but certainly the unions have tremendous amounts of power in Minnesota, maybe less so in some other states. So that's why they've entered into this agreement with the union and the school district, and that's why one of the reasons that it's unconstitutional.
It's a whole new argument for unions or against unions, whether you're for them or against them. But I think a lot of their positions and usefulness has been legislated away. Ladies and gentlemen, please go visit Pacific Legal Foundation. They just do remarkable work for the little guy. And we've been speaking with Wen Fa. And Wen, thank you for explaining this. I'm going to be watching this case closely. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us on the Denise Simon Experience. My buddy Alex Holstein with Geopolitical Monitor was gracious enough to accept the invitation to be on the Denise Simon Experience so we can talk about Venezuela. And I think Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, is exactly right when he is laying much of the blame on Cuba, but I think there's two other countries that he's leaving out of his talking point. So, Alex, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. Did I get that right? Is he missing China and Russia?
China, Russia, and a third, I think, is Iran.
Iran.
Yeah, they're there too. But I want to get on that Cuba point. That's an excellent. I'm glad that Secretary Pompeo is bringing that up because I think most of the world and through the media, which usually gets things wrong, but in this case at least have gotten the brushstrokes right on who some of the players are. Russia and China and Iran, they've been talked about several times in the media. We know that, or we've had reports that Russia has sent what they call kontraktniki, the contractors, their own private military contractors to protect Maduro.
The Wagner Group. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's really a GRU front. It's Russian military intelligence. We know these things, but a lot of people don't realize how influential Cuba is in the Venezuelan context. And Cuba basically pulls the power strings in that country. And one of the reasons they pull the power strings, there's a couple of areas where they really pull the power strings. And one of the reasons they pull the top-down power strings is because Maduro was basically hand-selected by the Cuban government. You have to remember that Hugo Chavez, when he was sick, and Hugo Chavez, love him or hate him, and we don't like him very much. Chavez was a smart man, and he was educated. He was a military officer. He had a ton of experience. He was a savvy, clever fellow, and very independently minded, although he aligned himself with Cuba and these other countries. So he set that all up. But when he was sick and convalescing in Cuba, the Cuban government asked him to pick Maduro. And the reason they asked him to pick Maduro as his anointed successor was because Maduro was a controllable goon and very dumb. His only education really was in an indoctrination center in Cuba. Growing up. So he had not had a formal education other than Marxist-Leninist Cuban indoctrination, and is very much aligned with Cuba and his mindset, and also doesn't have much of a mind of his own. So he's a very controllable goon is how I would describe him. So basically Cuba, he's a puppet for the Cuban government. So basically when you're talking about Venezuela, you're almost talking about basically taking on the Cuban government by proxy. Mm-hmm.
Now we have these kind of quasi votes going on at the UN, and China and Russia veto those votes with regard to Venezuela. And I'm disappointed that the United States, and I would say other leaders, because Canada is part of the Lima Group, the Organization for American States, and whatnot. Why? It's stunning to me that we are not calling out China and Russia for being complicit in a humanitarian crisis that's causing a sweeping consequence in Latin America. We saw and we continue to see what Russia has done in Syria, and it's almost the same thing, Alex, or is that overstated?
I think it's a bit overstated in terms of the commitment Russia has to Venezuela versus Syria. I think the Russians were much more willing to move more aggressively in Syria, overtly aggressively, because it's not as a regionally a threat to the United States. Remember, this is in our backyard in Venezuela. They will be very devious there. And of course, they want to maintain the influence in the region, and it's the same game they were playing back in when they wore Soviet clothes, which is ironic that they've got a left-wing client state there, but they were doing the same thing back during the Cold War when they were messing around in our backyard, and we couldn't tolerate it then, and we shouldn't tolerate it now. But I think I'm glad to see a little bit. I feel your frustration on that, but at the same time, I'm glad that we're having a sort of cooler head prevail kind of attitude in terms of the greater global scope. Because don't forget, once you turn up the heat on the international front with Russia and China, it becomes a much more global issue, and it has the risk of impacting or infecting other aspects of our relationships with China and Russia, which, as you know, are multifaceted and complex. And we have a lot of areas right now with Russia, for example, in Syria and Ukraine, and potentially the Baltics that are
right.
Potential hotspots or are ongoing hotspots. And we don't want to. The water's already boiling there, so we don't want to necessarily spill it over the pot. And with China, we have issues in the South China Sea and with Taiwan. So we don't want to add to that mix, that volatile mix, if it's not necessary. Because right now it's not going to be solved we know that, come on, the UN's not going to solve anything. Okay. The UN couldn't solve the Rubik's Cube if you gave them if you put the stickers on for them the right way. Yeah. They wouldn't know how to solve that. So the problem is, I think this is a regional fix, more or less. And the reason I say that is because the threat is extremely regional and severe. And really the main player here, and where we have strength, and you've got to play to your strengths. Where we have strength is in Colombia. And thank goodness for Colombia. But the Colombians are very worried right now. And the reason the Colombians are worried, they border Venezuela. And remember, two of the main USAID warehouses where they're storing all this food and aid, or where there are 2 points, not warehouses, but 2 points where they're storing these food in several facilities, food and medical aid to the Venezuelans that's being blocked by Maduro and is being prevented from coming in. Those are in Colombia. 2 of them are in Colombia. And the Colombians, they're very frustrated because, look, you've had almost 20 years since Plan Colombia came into force in 2000. This is a multi-billion-dollar program that the United States has gotten a huge reward on its investment, and the Colombians have gotten a huge reward from it as well, from seizing upon the opportunity. And bravo to them for doing so. But they've stabilized their country. They stabilized. Remember where Colombia was in the 80s and 90s with FARC and Pablo Escobar. Okay, it was really unstable, especially in that hinterland region, which is right by Venezuela and right on the border. And now all of that work, all of that those stabilization efforts, it wasn't fully stabilized. Well, they paid off, but now they're being undermined, and now they're being destabilized because you have a huge influx of refugees, for example, you have 3 million Venezuelans leaving, perhaps not classed as refugees, but they've fled Venezuela because you've had a 50 to 60% contraction in the economy of Venezuela. That's basically the entire economy's collapsed. 50 to 60% contraction. That's a full-scale economic collapse. So Venezuela is completely collapsed in everything but its government, which is hanging on by its fingernails and will continue to do so. So you have that problem. And
well, let me ask you this. When it comes to Guaido, for the sake of argument, let's say that we got Maduro out of there and he's vacationing and living, for the rest of his life in Cuba. And now we have Guaido. Does Guaido have the connections and the pull and the savviness to, because I think what I'm hearing is it took so many years to stabilize Colombia and get Colombia where it needs to be. Can Guaido, is it going to take 20 years to bring Venezuela back where it needs to be?
Well, just on a brushstroke sort of prognostication, I think you bring in someone new and fresh who's considered the antithesis and contrast to Maduro and the current situation. He symbolizes the idea of reform and rejuvenation, so and reconstruction. So with the right messaging, and it does come down to the right messaging to bring people together. And the idea of okay, here we have a shot at changing things. Let's try this new path. I think the Venezuelan people right now in desperation would elect a local dog catcher if they thought that it would make things happen. They've elected him anyway, but they would follow whoever is leading them down a different path than where they're going now and lead them to sort of salvation. But don't forget, I think he could, because I think the United States is going to get behind him massively, and there'll be massive aid efforts and globally too. And this is where the UN can play a role. But you already have aid organizations. I mean, USAID's down there. They're working with it's a Catholic Church, charities that are down there that are the most effective right now, and have the best intelligence on the ground, to tell you the truth, on what's going on. I have sources that are telling me this. And they're the only ones that are really doing anything down there. And I can tell you that the bishops of the Catholic Church who are involved in this are calling on the military commanders in Venezuela to disobey Maduro and allow the assistance in, the aid assistance in. And this is creating some fracturing in the military high command, because some of those military commanders are done with Maduro. They want rid of him.
Yeah, we've seen a lot defect. Yeah.
Right. But you also have military commanders who are going to hold on by their fingernails because they have been collecting money from the narco trafficking, and they've made a lot of money. And they also feel like that if Maduro goes down, they're going to drown on that sinking ship themselves, because the people will seek retribution against them for the years of narco trafficking and the graft.
All right, let me get radical here if I can.
Sure.
Why are we not flying in, if you will, some of this humanitarian aid instead of putting it on tractor trailers and having it sit on a bridge? And then with those generals that have in fact defected, that we drop this aid to them, or can they still not be trusted?
I don't know if we have. I honestly don't know the exact answer to that, other than to tell you that either we haven't thought of it, which, it sounds silly, but wouldn't surprise me. Or we just don't have the networks on the ground, which is more likely to ensure that aid gets to where it's going. Look, I know for a fact that the intelligence that we're getting off the ground is not necessarily from, let's just say it's not necessarily from our own great intelligence networks in Venezuela. You would think that our intelligence agencies, who are so brilliant at finding and digging up phony dossiers, that that they would be able to figure and text each other little notes about it and giggle and use emojis, that they would be able to set up a network in our own backyard of agents, etc., who could feed them information on the ground and people who could get things done, fixers on the ground. Well, guess what? Surprise, surprise, no. Our National Security Council probably is getting most of its intel, and our White House and everyone else probably getting most of their intel from people like the aid workers themselves, people, the Catholic Church people, those kinds of people, because they probably do not have big sourcing on the ground. And that would mean that they don't have the infrastructure on the ground to affect that kind of Berlin blockade program.
Do I get to rightly blame the ambassador industry or the ambassador world for a lot of this failure here? Because, I mean, the United States, I don't think has an ambassador to Venezuela, but we have, some kind of aide de camp, whatever we call them. But we've got other ambassadors, Canada, the Brits, other essentially Western allies have ambassadors. And, these ambassadors are sending cables and they're talking to each other and so forth. I guess this didn't begin under the Trump administration. This was going into a tailspin during the Obama administration. So I'm going to lay a lot of the blame there. And then I would say with some of the allied diplomatic corps that would allow this to happen.
Well, I think it behooves us to allow it to happen to a certain point. I mean, there's a crossover point. I'm not saying that, believe me, I'm not giving anybody credit that they did
sure,
it on purpose.
okay,
Like,
that makes sense.
We're brilliant. But letting it happen at the same time, they may not have orchestrated it on purpose, but letting it happen at the same time is kind of, I mean, I don't think they think about it in terms of, we want to create a humanitarian crisis. But I think they think that the Maduro regime being destabilized is a good thing if they can get Guaido in there. I think they would have liked to have had a smoother transition to the other guy. But in the meantime, if they destabilize this guy and it gets this bad, I mean, it will be, if he goes down, he's not going to leave. I don't think he's going to end up on a beach in Cuba. That's my prediction. I think he's going to go down, and it's going to get really bloody. I think Venezuela is going to destabilize. You have these colectivos. I'm just going to take a slight tangent here, but you have these groups called colectivos, which are the real Chavismo. Chavismo is the sort of Marxist nationalist ideology of Chavez, and these people were trained in Cuba by Cuban intelligence. They're handpicked. They're called colectivos. They're sort of the paramilitaries that protect Maduro, and they act as sort of a Praetorian guard for the government. And sure, if the high command, if the military defects, they still have to get through the colectivos. They will get through them. They'll probably have at that point Colombian help, because my sources tell me that the Colombian government at the highest levels, to the presidential level, are frustrated enough with the situation in Venezuela that they're about to intervene militarily, which would be in the form of U.S. trained Colombian special forces who are very experienced in warfare, obviously having fought with the FARC and the Escobars and all these cats. So they're ready to go in, and if they go in and assist, say, defected Venezuelan military in attacking the presidential palace, then you're going to have a real fight, a real duke it out kind of fight between them and the colectivos protecting Maduro in the presidential palace, right down to that sort of point where they're going room to room and clearing room to room until they get him. It's going to get like that, and that means it's complete chaos in the streets as well. And I think that's what you're going to see. And I think I don't think Maduro's ever gonna leave. And I think to your point about the ambassadors, I don't think there's really anything, to be fair to people who I normally like to blame for everything. I don't think that there's really, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any. I don't think there's anything anyone could have done, and this is probably, unfortunately, sort of it's like radiation treatment for cancer. It's really bad, and your hair falls out, and it's awful, and you lose 60 pounds or whatever, and you can't keep any food down, and hopefully at the other end of it, you come out and you go into remission. Well, right now, this is sort of radiation treatment in Venezuela to get out of cancer.
Well, we're also chasing money because we know that, historically, these corrupt leaders have been kind of stashing away and transferring millions, if not billions of dollars out of the government's coffers. So I think in some respects, I've heard Pompeo talk about, and Bolton for that matter, talk about the fact that we're really tracking the transfers in the money pipelines to see who all is involved here, and working to at least protect some of the monies that we can that rightfully belong to Venezuelans or the Venezuelan legitimate part of the government, if there is one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how effective we'll be at that is remains to be seen. Right now, I think the U.S., the best thing we can do is try to get rid of Maduro through diplomatic or other extrajudicial, or covert military action of some kind, whatever we can do, or covert action. Whatever we can do, both overtly and covertly, to get rid of Maduro, and at the same time get the people the aid they need. Those are the two things the United States should really be focused on, and then hopefully we've got a team, and I'm
mobilized.
That a team that is writing a plan out for the post Maduro transition that is in conjunction with our allies. I would hope that we're meeting with at the UN level, but this is where the UN could come handy as an area to communicate. We meet with our fellow UN ambassadors and talk about getting a plan together to transition out of the Maduro era and the Chavez and really Chavismo. The nice thing about it is that if Maduro goes down fighting like that and he's killed, once he's killed, that's the death of Chavismo. It'll have gotten so bad by that point that nobody will want anything to do with it ever again. If you have if you had a peaceful transition, if Maduro had stepped down peacefully after the election or whatever and said, "Oh yeah, this is great," then the Chavez crew would be around for a long time to come, and he's stupid because he could have just sat and out of government and the Chavistas could have taken over another time later on, like let Guaido fail or whatever, So he rolled the dice. He went for the whole thing because he knew he was finished regardless. So he's going to stretch it out as long as he can.
Well, I think because Cuba told him to fight too.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because they want to hold on.
But it was a bad chess move because, I know our State Department, I know our U.S. Treasury Department knows a lot more than that they're telling us, and that's fine. But I think in some of the things, the intelligence and the tracking of the monies and so forth, will end up embarrassing some other governments rogue governments that we necessarily need, including Iran and Cuba and Russia and China, correct? So it's it's really beyond chess, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely fourth dimensional. I'll tell you one small way that Canada could help, for example, and other countries. The United States, we don't travel to Cuba for vacations and things like that. We're not used to that. Although Obama's opened things up a little bit, we're not used to having an open relationship with Cuba, and certainly don't see it as a vacation destination. Up here in Canada, where I live, in Toronto, you see signs, you see billboards like "Go to Cuba," and like it looks like Club Med, because Canadians vacation in Cuba all the time, and it would be nice if the Trudeau government, if it has time to get out from under its own scandal, would come out and say, Canadians, we're going to discourage you from traveling to Cuba until, don't put money in the Cuban government while this is going on in Venezuela. Why not start an embargo on Cuba while they're creating this chaos
I see. It makes
in
sense.
Venezuela.
That makes sense.
That's the kind of pressure that, Canada and these other sort of lesser Western nations, and I call them lesser Western nations because they are lesser Western nations, could do in terms of power structure. They're lesser. That's what they could do. That's the kind of thing they could do. And believe me, that would hurt the Cuban economy. If everyone boycotted going to Cuba, at least the humanitarian groups should do it. But why don't they? Oh, I know, because Cuba's doesn't call itself fascist and doesn't have pictures of Mussolini up. It has pictures of Marx and Lenin, and that's perfectly okay.
Well, there's a lot of moving parts here, ladies and gentlemen. We've been speaking with Alex Holstein at Geopolitical Monitor, doing remarkable work and comes out with really cogent, sane summaries on a lot of the conflicts that are going on. But there's certainly, when it comes to Venezuela, I mean, there's other countries in play beyond Colombia. I mean, we've got Ecuador, we got Nicaragua, certainly Iran, China, Russia, Cuba. And then Cuba's got I think about 23,000 military forces in Venezuela also. So I guess tomorrow's going to look much like today. I don't believe that this situation is going to solve itself probably in the next month or so. But we're going to have to pull on an awful lot of strings here in order to get some kind of a grip and protect Guaido. I just hope he's the right person to kind of lead this charge. I guess he's getting an awful lot of advice from the United States diplomatic wing of government out of the State Department. Big, huge thanks to you, Mr. Alex Holstein. Thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. Ladies and gentlemen, we've loved having you along for the ride, and we'll see you again quite soon.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.